What's up, people? How y'all doing out there? I got a new co-host for this segment. The name of Jez Graham. Well, this is our breakout sessions, and so this is about the man, the myth, the legend, Dookie Stick himself, George Duke. And so it's great to have another keyboard player. It's like the keyboard corner, if you will, where we can kind of talk about things from a keyboard player perspective and, just a musical perspective. So, man, let's just jump right into it. Feet first. So, do you think that every keyboard player has to come through George Duke? Like every keyboard player kind of has to know who George Duke is?
Yes, absolutely.
And it's for various reasons. And most of people in my demographic, as far as African-American keyboard players, they may not know of the early years, which we will talk about that. They may know just of like the recent stuff, more of the R&B, fusion, jazz kind of stuff, or even his like Brazilian stuff that he did. They may know about that, but they may not know about the other stuff.
Maybe Reach for It.
Yeah, Reach for It. They're definitely going to know Reach for It.
Love Affair.
Snapshot, Brazilian Love Affair. Yeah, exactly.
And then later, you're talking later, like even in the 90s, some of the what was the album? I'm trying to remember the names of the albums. And then he put out so many records.
Yeah, Illusions, Snapshot. Yeah, he did.
He had a hit. There was a record, No Reason.
No Rhyme or Reason. That's one of the biggest ones. But we'll get there because that was in the R&B charts when I was coming up, So what are those kind of, tell us a little bit about George Duke and how you got to know him, and we'll talk about some stylistic things too, but how did you get to know George Duke, and what is your history with him?
He's my favorite. He's always been my favorite keyboard player when people ask me that. And it's because of the whole range of what he did, actually. And, from straight ahead to funk and fusion, producer, vocalist.
Yeah.
Love his vocals.
Yeah.
But I actually, I was going to ask you, have you ever heard the 1976 solo George Duke album?
I have not.
Solo. It's a solo keyboard album.
Really?
Yeah, I want you to look that one up. It's a little bit rare, but you can find it. 1976 solo keyboard album.
Because there's some albums, as I'm doing research for this, that I know of that's not listed, like Merewood Suite. Are you familiar with that one?
That one had Chester Thompson on drums. And I think Alonzo Johnson might be on that one.
Yeah, and Stanley Clarke, I think, is on it too.
Yeah, that's a real orchestral thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Beautiful piece. Well, I go back to George. Pretty much got in my head and never left it. And it was in 1973 at a Frank Zappa concert.
Okay.
And this is in New York at Lincoln Center. It was on Thanksgiving of 1973. And I went with some friends of mine. We came down from Massachusetts because I'd already left New York, and we went to the show. And here's what happened. Before the show started, they were playing some music, over the PA. Before the concert. And it was the greatest thing I'd ever heard. It just blew my mind completely. Wow. So I went up to the sound person and asked them what this music was. And it turned out it was the album Feel by George Duke, which hadn't been released yet.
Wow.
That was his second or third album, I think. And Zappa's actually on that album. He's on a cut. Right. He didn't use his name on there, but he went under the name Abdul X, actually, for contractual reasons.
Right.
So anyway, this music, the first song on that album is called Funny Funk. And it just blew my mind. I just loved it so much. I just love this music. And that was Ndugu on the drums on that album. And George did a lot of key bass on that one. There were some bass players on some of that album, a guy named John Hurd, who Neil Starkey has told me he used to play with. He knows.
Wow.
Yeah.
Crazy.
No surprise there, right?
Right.
So anyhow, after the Zappa concert started, this is the time of album called Roxy and Elsewhere. But it was before it was released, but they were doing that music. There's a song called the Bebop Tango.
Right.
which is an amazing composition. And at one point, Frank says, George is going to play all these funny notes and sing them. And the audience was instructed to dance to the funny notes that George played. Whatever it was, he was singing, scatting along with his notes. And anyway, George pretty much went into my head at that point and never came out of it.
Wow.
And then I met him one day in 1975, and I was staying with my father in a hotel before we got our house. So George happened to be in the lobby, and I just went up to him and I asked him, how come you left Zappa? And he said it was time.
Wow.
So he was recording in Berkeley at Fantasy Records. He was recording a straight ahead thing. Right. And I'm thinking, boy, he's playing with Zappa and Billy Cobham and all these things and also doing straight ahead. But it was his versatility and his feel. Speaking of feel, the album Feel. So that sent me on a quest on his early albums. They were Faces in Reflection, Feel. Was the third one Liberated Fantasy? No, The Horror Will Prevail, of course.
Okay.
And I love the blues. She Heard My Cry. Masterpiece.
Yes. Right.
You can find those 4 albums or 3 of them on a box set somewhere. But those albums, I guess, to me, those are a textbook, and every musician needs to be listening to those records.
Well, definitely. I sort of got hooked on him later on and then retreated backwards to find the Zappa stuff, which was pretty amazing, especially with him singing as well. But my first encounter with George Duke was through, remember it was a Columbia Records or something like that would send you the first album, 12 albums for a penny or something like that. Then every month they'll send you a new one. Yeah. So at that time I was like a big Joe Sample head, so I had ordered a bunch of stuff, and he's like, well, if you like this, then you'll like this. So they sent me Snapshot. That was 1992, I believe. Yeah. Sent me Snapshot, and I was like, oh man, this is killing, right? So I just started ordering albums after that, and then I had to just try to discontinue the thing because I was getting like phone calls like, you haven't paid for whatever, blah blah blah. But it's interesting hearing George Duke in 1992 and going forward. And then when I was looking at him later on in life, I was like, what do you mean he played with Zappa? And then how crazy Zappa's music is. I'm like, of course it was George Duke that played on that, because the time signatures, I mean, Zappa stuff is not easy to play.
And he was Zappa's favorite. He was his favorite keyboardist, because when I auditioned for Frank and spent a few days with him in 1987, I was telling him about, when I heard George with you in New York, it changed my life, and he's like, well, what songs do you know from that era? Like immediately, it's like, and I said, he's my favorite. He goes, he's my favorite too. And if I could get him, I would, but I can't.
Right. He went to school for trombone and composition.
Did you know he played trombone with Zappa when he was first with him?
Oh, I didn't know that until later on.
Yeah, you can see some clips of him playing trombone. There's a movie called 200 Motels, which is a really bizarre movie. I mean, it makes no sense really, but it's about life on the road. It makes sense in relation to life on the road. But George was brand new in the band at that point. Right. And because he had done a Jean-Luc Ponty album of the music of Zappa. Zappa got George to sing. He actually urged him to sing. Wow. And he urged him to play synthesizers. And actually, George has credited Frank with encouraging him to explore synthesizers and production, for that matter. But did you ever hear one? You're talking about the 90s. Did you ever hear one called "Is Love Enough"? I just remembered that title.
Yes. So remember, the crazy thing about George Duke, this little cascading kind of thing down, and his left hand is moving toward upwards. So Phil Davis, another great keyboard player in Atlanta, he used to play background keyboard, keyboard too with Duke. And he said one day they did a festival, right? And Herbie Hancock was on the festival. Somebody else, another Greg Fillinganes, and another great keyboard player. And Phil was like, oh man, what's going on? You know, we're about to play right before Herbie, and he's in the wings listening to us. And I think Chick Corea was there too. And George Duke told Phil, hey man, he's a keyboard player just like we are. He puts his pants on just like we do. Go out there and play. He's like, they would expect nothing less. They don't want you to be scared. They want you to play. And I was like, wow. For him to do that, and he gave Phil all kind of solos, and another, you know, Atlanta person, Lil Jon, the drummer, he played on one of those albums. I think the one with Christian McBride on it. I can't think of the name of that album. But
Face the Music, maybe?
I think it was Face the Music. Yeah. And so either it was Face the Music or was it Cool or something like that?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's what it was.
One of those. Yeah. So, but he was very, very gracious. But you speak about synthesizers. He had a huge collection. There was a story going on. I think it was maybe 15, 16. Well, it's hard to believe that he died in 2013, right?
I saw you the day he passed, remember? At Kennesaw.
Yes.
That was the day I brought Jana to get into the school, and then you walked in and you told me.
Yes.
George had passed.
Well, you have a great memory. I forgot all about that.
Because we connected that day, and I know you've done a tribute to George, and you know, you just triggered a memory for me. Was I ran into Little John at somewhere in Little Five Points, so a place they used to have a jam. What was it called? Right. The pub, Five Spot maybe. Anyway, I was telling him what a George fan I was, you know, and he said, "Man, you should just email him and tell him I said to," and I did. And he was so warm. We had a nice couple email exchanges, and I owe that to Little John.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny because he was incredibly lonely after his wife passed.
Oh,
you know, and didn't record anything. And then he recorded. I mean, one song hit him. He had stopped playing. One song hit him, and he did a tribute to his late wife, and then that's what spurred the album. He did the album.
Last album.
Yeah, last album. And then he passed after that.
That last album was great. That was some heavy, heavy music. I remember a long piece. I can't remember the title. Something about Orion, something to do with space. A really long form piece that was just good as any of his stuff. And, you know, the story about being at a concert, I thought it reminded me of a different story where Zawinul and George were backstage at a show where Herbie and Chick were playing. And Zawinul said something to George. He's like, they can't play the blues. You know, they didn't play with Cannonball.
Right.
Like, the two of them played with Cannonball, you know.
Wow.
And I don't think he was putting them down. It was more of like a camaraderie that they both played with Cannonball, and they had a real blues edge, you know. But when George played with Frank, when I told you he was playing the trombone and in that early more rock kind of thing, George left the Mothers because he got a chance to play with Cannonball. Right. And that had been his dream, to play, one of his dreams, and he really wanted to play with Cannonball. So he left Zappa and then did Cannonball, and that's some great music. Phoenix.
That was like 1971-ish, right?
Early 70s. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And those albums are really cool. That's some of his finest playing, I think, with Cannonball.
Yeah.
And he came back, Frank. He came back after Cannonball.
Yeah, he came back. Right.
That's the period that's kind of the golden era of George with Frank, to me. You know, 74, 73, 4, 5.
Right. Well, if you look at this picture right here, he has some of the iconic instruments.
The clav up top.
Clavinet. And remember, he used to have that big whammy bar kind of thing on it, too? He got
clavitar, I think he called it. He invented a thing where he could bend the notes on the clav. And that just flashed me to an album that's one of my favorites, and it's not as well known. I bet you know about it. It's called Guardian of the Light.
Yes.
It was like a space funk opera.
Yes, you remember that.
A lot of clavitar, a lot of bending notes with the clav on there. A lot of Earth, Wind, and Fire influence on that album, I would say. Louis Johnson was the bass player on that one.
Right. And of course, Fender Rhodes. There was iconic moments, too, on Rhodes where he talks about how he didn't even like the Rhodes when he first, came out. So then, he's just had to treat it like it was a different voice, and then he, really fell in love with it.
You talking about Chick?
No, I'm talking about George Duke.
Okay. Because I know Chick and Herbie, even Herbie wasn't that wild about it at first.
Yeah.
What was that Great Miles Out? Is it Feed to Kilimanjaro, I think it's called.
Right.
It might have been one of the first that he presented him with an electric piano, and he wasn't so sure about it. But when you listen to it, it's wow, that created a whole new vocabulary. And then In a Silent Way.
Right. George Duke loved those quartal chords, kind of like McCoy Tyner as well.
Yeah.
Did you notice that? Or you?
Yes.
What kind of things?
He did the fourths thing on his solos. You can hear it a lot on his solos.
Yeah.
Following the fourths chromatically, he was the king of that.
Yeah. It gives you a more open sound, because if you did a fourth, like if you did C, F, B flat, right? You could play a lot of things. You could play the major three, you could play the minor three, you could play the major six, the flat six, all those different sounds. So I think it was that those type of voicings was a tribute to his versatility.
And for comping, like he's a master comper. Like,
yes,
if you listen to his comping behind Zappa's solos, he's doing all that stuff. He's giving this tension and release that, and Zappa a lot of times only soloed on one chord.
He had a great feel for just as an all-around player, but just had a great feel for knowing what fit in space, and I know that has to do with his compositional skills. Was it a big thing for, like, Zappa's group was so, for lack of better terms, weird, that you didn't have many brothers in that type of music? Was it weird in that time to have like African Americans in that type of environment? Because Zappa, I mean, would you consider that rock fusion-esque, whatever? What would you consider Zappa?
And classical. So in this case, George's classical training was a plus for Frank, because he could read anything.
Right.
But Frank was really into like rhythm and blues. Okay, so that's one of his biggest things, like early blues and rhythm and blues.
Right.
Johnny Guitar Watson was a big influence, and he's on a couple of the records, and he's also on George's "I Love the Blues, She Heard My Cry."
Right.
And Johnny Otis, who we talked about a little earlier, was a mentor to Frank, and he helped him sometimes get musicians and helped him behind the scenes on some recording projects. And some of the great vocalists in Frank's groups, Napoleon Murphy Brock, Ike Willis, Ray White, these are incredible soul singers and blues singers who, without them, that's really one of the key, actually. These are African-American vocalists, guitarists. Napoleon also played saxophone. Very key component to Frank's music. So Frank, his music kind of took on the characteristics of whoever was in that particular band. So the bands from 73, 74, 75, they have probably the most jazz influence, I would say.
Right.
And that's specifically from George, and also from the horn players like Bruce Fowler, and just Jean-Luc Ponty was in that era.
Yeah.
He had great soloists. Later, when that group disbanded, Frank, I think, focused more on a rock kind of rhythm section and more on guitar solos, which was also great, and had other elements and wonderful keyboard players as well. My mentor, Tommy Mars, played with him on many albums, and he's coming more from classical, but and jazz. And he could play like Art Tatum. If you heard this guy just sit at a piano, you'd think you were listening to Tatum. Actually, he's also a classical conservatory guy. But another guy, Peter Wolf, who apparently used to live in Atlanta and play with Bill Hatcher. He can tell you all about him. They had a fusion band. I've never met Peter Wolf, but Peter Wolf went on to also be a big producer. He reminded me of George, a lot of his mini-mood playing. And apparently George recommended him for that gig.
Wow.
Yeah, but he lived in Atlanta, and ask Hatcher about it sometime. He's got some memories. Yeah.
you mentioned synthesizers, but I don't think young people really know what went into
Oh yeah,
a
now it's called
synthesizer.
presets, right?
Right now it's presets. You could
Yeah.
tweak the presets,
Oh man.
but with synthesizers, you started with nothing and you had to create the sound.
And that's why these cats all had their own voice. So you could hear
Right.
one note. If you heard Jan Hammer, you knew that was him. If you heard George, you knew it was him. I don't know. It's funny you mentioned Joe Sample, and I need you to educate me because, people come up to me at the airport and they go, "Oh yeah, I hear you listen to Joe Sample." And the truth is, I feel like they're hearing George in my playing.
Right.
Because I respect Joe Sample, but I don't know his work. I know him more as a session guy, like on all these great sessions and the Crusaders, but I actually don't know his work. What should I listen to? Where would I start?
Ironically enough, he was on Bitches Brew with Miles Davis. He was on that album. Yes.
Really?
Joe Sample has an album that he played with George Benson back in the day. Well, George Benson had him on an album or something. But, it was that Texas kind of thing. But what they're probably hearing in you, Jez, is your versatility. Joe Sample had some really interesting chords, and you would think, I think that you can put George Duke and Joe Sample in the same boat with the way their careers went, with the exception of like the Zappa stuff. But Joe Sample was on a lot of stuff, and they're probably hearing.
I know him from a Joni Mitchell album,
right?
And he played great on that album.
Right. But he definitely has his own style. I would say that George Duke is a little more versatile because Joe Sample, his sound is going to be the same thing wherever. Well, I guess you could say the same thing about George Duke to a degree, but maybe it's
the blues-based feel. I mean, I think that and the gospel feel probably is there.
Right.
But what would be a song to learn from Joe Sample?
There's so many.
What are your favorites?
But the Ashes to Ashes album is good. 7 Years Bad Luck or Good Luck, whatever that is. That's everybody. That's I think that's Spellbound. I can't remember which one that is. But there's a lot. I'll shoot you some. And
then I need to get into him. I've been meaning to for a long time. I knew Way Back Home by the Crusaders. We used to play that with Jimmy Brown.
There's a cover I did on one of my records. Is Keep That Same Old Feeling, right? The Crusaders.
Okay.
So I had to get the licensing from two people because Joe Sample's estate and the saxophone player's estate was battling over the rights for that album for that composition. So I had to pay licensing fees to both estates until they settle. And both of them are gone now. So when they settle, I'll get $25 back, $50 back, whatever.
Lucky.
So like George Duke with the synthesizers, he had to learn how to make sound.
Yeah, he made his own sound. He created. Oh man, I mean, if you listen to, how can you do that with all those keyboards and you're hitting these hard compositional sections,
right?
Putting like string parts and the clavinet and vocalizing at the same time.
Oh, right.
And then your lead stuff and his sound, his mini moog sound was just
right. Oh yeah. Could you imagine being a roadie for George Duke? Like all the keyboards you got to bring in.
Do you have his songbook? I want to show something to you.
No, look at that.
Keyboard and vocal arrangements.
Wow.
There he is.
Okay, dude, I got to come over there.
Yeah, there he is.
Look at that.
Right. My favorite George Duke song of all time, Someday.
Right.
That's the most beautiful song, Someday. Al Jarreau.
Can you look at this? Look at this image right here. Wow.
And the ARP. There's the ARP.
ARP, yep.
So he used ARP? I thought he used Moog. I could maybe both.
Yeah, I thought he was a Moog person myself. What is that to the right? Is that a Waldorf? What is that? Wow.
This could be that might be the Zappa keyboard setup. I'm not sure if that's
right.
Was with him or not. Might have been right around then.
I got to see bringing that to gigs.
Yeah, no, because I don't bring anything to gigs. I got to see him with the Cobb and Duke band also.
Oh wow!
When they were first starting out, It wasn't Alphonso Johnson at that point. It was another bass player named Doug Rauch, who was
Oh wow, yeah, Doug Rauch.
Yeah, it was great. And there's a Billy Cobham album called Life and Times, which is really the Cobham Duke band with Doug on bass, and that's good stuff.
Would you say that his most iconic album is probably the Brazilian Love Affair one? Is that you think that's his biggest one?
Oh, I don't know. For me, the most iconic are those first five. All of them. Faces and
Reflections. For regular people, not like
popularity. Reach for It, I think, might have been Reach for It was a really big hit.
Right.
She was E's on that record before she was E, when she was Escobedo.
Right.
It's good.
What about Jean-Luc Ponty? How did their relationship start? Because that album was Jean-Luc Ponty featuring the George Duke and the George Duke Trio, something like that, right?
And that was King Kong Plays the Music of Zappa. I think it was King Kong Plays the Music of Frank Zappa. Or did they do something other than that?
Yeah, did George Duke get Jean-Luc Ponty in the group? Because that was before he joined Zappa, right?
Yeah, I'm not really sure how that worked.
And he had some Zappa musicians in some of his recordings. And then I remember when we were talking about the collaborations, he also collaborated with some people and used a pseudonym, an alias or something. Do you know about that?
I'm not sure about that.
It was like Gino Allison or something like that. It's a pseudonym.
That one. I didn't know about that.
And so he also had collaborations with Gabriella Anders, vocalist.
I know that.
Okay, and this is Jean-Luc Ponty. Yeah, with the George Duke Trio. That's it right there.
I don't know that one, believe it or not.
Yeah, that was one of the first albums where he was being featured.
The Horror Will Prevail is Alphonso Johnson and Ndugu, and there's it's so.
I like Alphonso Johnson. A lot of people, he comes in after some iconic bass players in some groups, but I really like his playing on a lot of stuff, Alphonso Johnson.
It's one of the best. Weather Report with Alphonso, nothing against Jocko. I love that era equally, but with Alphonso, I think Mysterious Traveler is still my favorite Weather Report album.
What about George Duke and Stanley Clark's?
That's a whole nother thing. That was a very popular. They had some big hits. Sweet Baby. Right. Was it called Sweet Baby?
Yeah, Sweet Baby. Yep.
I think that was a pretty big hit, wasn't it?
It was a huge hit. Yeah, it was on R&B charts too.
That was good. And they did they did 3 albums. I remember the third one was in the 90s. Yeah. And it had Dennis Chambers on drums.
That's right.
They did Mothership Connection.
Yes.
A cover of that.
He produced Queen Latifah's jazz album.
Really?
George Duke did. Yes.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
I remember hearing her sing and liking it.
Right. And he did that whole album. There was this, matter of fact, the Gabriella Anders connection that he did with her. There was this synthesizer. I was trying to find it for the longest time that he took this solo. It was kind of like Roland has this synthesizer patch called Lamb Lead. It's like a lamb, because it's kind of like bars a little bit, it's weird. Yeah. And I looked it up and it was George Duke playing it. I was like, no wonder. Like, it's just like you said, you create those sounds, you get personal. You can try to copy somebody's sound, but if you didn't get it from the horse's mouth, you didn't know really what that sound was, or talk to somebody who was a tech for somebody or whatever.
I learned about sine waves and all that stuff. I told you I didn't have a degree, but I went to college for 6 months at a school in Olympia, Washington called Evergreen. And I went there specifically to study synthesizers because they had this great electronic music program. And a guy named Steve Fisk taught me all about sine waves, all this. Yeah. And he had an ARP 2600. And so I was thinking at that point, I wanted to get into more synths and not just play piano. And really, I never quite did go all that way, but I do have a basic understanding. But I wanted to ask you, how do you make your sounds on keyboards now? Do you use soft synths like I hear about now? Or do you how does that work? Do you program, or what do you do?
Yeah, well, it's this era now, just you can pay for cats to make sounds for you, right? And download them to your keyboard. there was a guy who lived in town. I think he moved to Texas. Reggie, I can't think of Reggie's last name. He came in and he said, "Hey man, I'll program some sounds for you." So I guess it starts with the preset on some of the keyboards, but then you can tweak them and then save them, right? But I'm gonna pull something in the end, which I've been getting into lately. To Dave Smith. Hold on, stay right there.
Dave Smith, I've heard of. I think my son Bill told me about him. He's like, he's the Prophet guy, right?
Yeah.
You know how badly I wanted a Prophet back in the day? I couldn't afford one.
No, it's
Prophet
really
12?
expensive.
Prophet 12?
Yeah. You know, on those old synthesizers, the polyphony wasn't great. You could only play, the more you stacked sounds, the less you would have polyphony. So you'd have to decide, if I would need a 4-note chord, you know what I'm saying? I can only stack this twice or whatever and run through some filters and oscillators. And so if I remember sitting in, this was a while ago, Yin Yang Cafe, and is the Chronicle, that band? They had the guy who played synthesizer, and Phil Davis was playing like a Yamaha SY-77. And so, man, I begged to sit in. I asked the club owner. I shouldn't have. I was young. I shouldn't have begged to sit in. I should just took in the music, talk to the guys later. But I begged to sit in. The guys said, "Go up there," and I remember the group looking at me like, "Man, who is this guy?" Whatever. And so I wanted to go by Phil's keyboard and play because they had, preset sounds. They're like, "No, if you're going to play, you got to play on this synthesizer." The guy zeroed everything out. So the song is going on.
Had to start from scratch?
At the start from scratch.
On a sitting in?
Sitting in.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, I remember a sine wave. Remember a couple of oscillator stuff. I just dialed some stuff until I got it. Then I sat in, and we're like, oh, okay, cool. So after it was over with, the cat said, "Yeah, man, we don't let you just sit in on something like this. You got to create your own sound, whatever." And I was like, man, I'll never do that mug again.
That Prophet brought me back. I mean, I'm telling you, in 1980, 81, I wanted a Prophet so badly, but they cost $5,000.
Yes.
So I played in this band, one of my favorite bands I ever played with. It was in LA. They were called the Relievers. He's a great guitar player in that group called Blackbird McKnight, who you might remember from Herbie and the Headhunters.
Right.
He was in a later version on the album Flood, live Herbie album. He's on that. He's on Manchild, and he'd been with Parliament Funkadelic for years.
Yes.
And he's an amazing guitar player. We're an amazing group. This guy, Mark Anthony Thompson, who now goes by Chocolate Genius Incorporated. Look him up. He's a heavy cat.
Okay.
Really heavy. Right. I did get a Roland D50, right? When we moved to Atlanta in 88, I thought I better get a good keyboard to get started. I got to have equipment little, because I'm so not about equipment, but a lot better. I'm not going to cart a Rhodes around all the time,
Right.
And I like the D50.
The D50 had some nice stock sounds in it, man. It was really cool. So did you ever hear the story about George Duke had his instruments in a vintage U-Haul truck or something like that just before a gig? And somebody stole the U-Haul truck.
Oh.
Well, I had heard from someone that I can't remember who told me this story, that the U-Haul truck was stolen. It was like they were unpacking for some gig, whatever. And the guy went in and go see where it was. And when he came back, the U-Haul truck was gone. So it was all these vintage instruments, especially that clavinet that he had. He had the see-through clavinet with that bar and stuff. And George Duke made an appeal and said, "Hey, no questions asked." He says, if the U-Haul truck shows up back in the same place, if you go in this mailbox, there will be some money for you. Whoever took it, the U-Haul truck came back and he got all the instruments, but he said it would have been irreplaceable. That also reminds me of Jan Rico. You remember Jan Rico would drive the van for Derek Trucks and stuff like that?
Yeah.
And he had a trailer hitched and everybody else flew. but it was maybe about, I can't remember how many years ago, but they made this mass appeal on Facebook that, hey, Derek Trucks amps was in there, all his stuff was in there, and which was more amazing, Derek Trucks had every serial number to his Marshall amps, to all the stuff that was there.
Wow.
So there was a person jogging in Stone Mountain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they jog past and they see a crazy sight, so they call the police. Police show up. All he sees in the middle of this wooded area is a B3 organ, a bunch of amps, a drum set. Well, come to find out, the trailer was gone. So the police officer was like, maybe it was some guys needed a trailer. So when they opened up the trailer, like,
get rid of all the equipment.
They're like, we need a trailer because maybe they were starting a lawn care business or something. But could you imagine? Like, what is all this crap, man? Get this out of here. And it was a vintage instruments, vintage equipment. And this was worth way more than the trailer. Right. So when I did the George Duke tribute, I called up Phil Davis and Lil Jon, and I asked them, I said, hey, man, what are some of the songs that he had to do on all his concerts, you know? And Phil did one better. He sent me all the charts that George had. And you can see George's handwriting on some parts of it.
Do I have those?
I still have them. I'll send them
to me when I come over?
Yes. Yes.
That's what we were talking about, making our own notes, you know?
Right.
Just our little shorthand thing.
Right.
I had to do that on my Zappa audition years ago, too, because I couldn't read that stuff. So I had to make.
Right.
And in fact, when I come over, I'm going to bring you some Zappa music and some original sheet music of his.
Oh, I can't wait to check
sheet
that
music
out.
session.
But yeah, just to see somebody else's shorthand, and you know, it kind of validates too, Jez, that you can have your own system. The result is what really counts. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Did you get to see George at the Variety Playhouse when he played here that time?
I did not. I missed George. I saw George Duke one time, I believe, and it was with another, with Kirk Whalum, his Gospel According to Jazz. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I talked to Kirk Whalum, he said that album saved his career because he said that he wanted to recorded a gospel jazz kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The producer said no. The record company was like, no, that'll never sell. And he's like, really? So he called up George. He's like, I need to have somebody on that will be able to play both gospel and jazz and kind of fuse it together. And he had an amazing gospel piano player that he collaborated with to write the tunes, but he just knew that George Duke would be the one to solidify, and he did. And he told me that was one of his highest grossing selling albums, was that Gospel According to Jazz. And he never thought it was going to be a volume 2, but he made a volume 2, and I think a volume 3.
Yeah.
But George Duke was really, he was really instrumental in that. And to see him in that element, and the video footage of that record is so cool to see George Duke playing. And, you know, the sheer force that he is, but also the passion and the soul that which he plays with.
No, and at that Variety Playhouse, I had Bill with me, and we went up and got to meet him afterwards.
Oh, wow.
Very warm. And I thanked him for teaching me about the blues. He's like, I don't know what are you talking about? That's what you talk by listening to you. I learned about the blues.
Right.
I didn't come up in a church, you know?
Right.
Came up listening to him. And that's where I learned really that feel that is very important to me. And he didn't know who I was, you know, I don't know what I'm talking about, but we talked a lot about those early albums too. And, yeah, that was a good gig, by the way, at the Variety. There was a drummer named Ronald Bruner Jr. that I was really impressed with. Chris might know about him. I think he's done some pretty cool stuff.
Right.
Yeah, George is always inspiring. You know, but it didn't matter. Whenever he put out a record, I got it. All through the 80s and 90s, into the 2000s. If he put out a new product, I was going to buy that album and study it and learn from it. You know, and I loved everything he did. Have you ever heard this Al Jarreau tribute album that he did to George?
Yes.
It's pretty nice, but he did that song Someday. And I always thought Someday should have been a big hit record. I mean, George liked it so much that he did it twice, and then Al did it another time. So the second George version first one was on I Love the Blues, She Heard My Cry, but the second version was on an album, I forget, it might have been Dream On or Shine On, I can't recall, but it had
Shine On, yeah.
That's a good record. So he had a little more contemporary version of it. I think that should have been a really big hit single. It's like a Stevie Wonder where, you know, right. It's as good as any of the best Stevie Wonder to me.
So we can't leave this without talking about one thing: the Dookie stick, and his like keytar thing. And what do you think about that? What do you think about?
Cool. You know, I was never into that. It was a hit record, wasn't it?
Dookie was a hit record. Yeah.
No, I thought it was great. It was, you know, I saw him live in that era in Berkeley at the Berkeley Community Theater, and it was really an R&B show with a little bit of jazz.
So people don't know that we're on a stationary instrument, so we can't really move. There it is. Yeah.
I like what he did. Oh, Master of the Game. I think that's from Master of the Game. That's another favorite album of mine.
So so we cannot get like the movement behind play. Like you can move to a certain degree, but the instrument never moves. So a guitar player, saxophone player, all those kind of, they can interact with the audience, walk to the end of the stage, do all those kind of things. The keytar allowed you to do that kind of stuff. You know,
you ever tried it? Doing that kind of thing?
I did. When I did a tribute album, I borrowed a friend's keytar and strapped it on, man. And it was really, really cool. But it was so much freedom. But I had to have another keyboard player on the gig, you know.
Oh yeah.
So there he is, right there.
I mean, can you play quarterly? Can you play quarterly on those things, or just
yes, you can. You can play chords as well. But the best thing to do is the lead line stuff, because the effects, you can do the pitch bend from like your left hand kind of thing. Right?
You can use the modulation,
all that kind of stuff.
I mean, the first guy I saw do it before George, or maybe around the same time, was a guy named Roger Powell. He was the keyboard player for Todd Rundgren's Utopia.
Right.
And Roger used to work for ARP. He was a programmer. He's actually credited on the second Weather Report album with programming. He helped Zawinul program. But anyway, he had a thing called the Powell Probe, and it was a thing he wore, and it was hooked up to 10 modules. This is in 76. Wow. So around a similar era, and he did a lot of great stuff with it. We need to talk about that album, Master of the Game. That came out in, I'm guessing, 79. I don't know, after Brazilian Love Affair, maybe one or two after that. And
it's 1979, I believe.
Yeah, right around that era, might have been 80. And that album has great pop R&B songs and great funk jams. It's just, I actually think it's one of his best albums. It's you know, to me, it's another one like a Stevie Wonder album. It's right up there, you know.
I think he did it a year before Brazilian Love Affair.
Okay, so it was before that one. Okay.
Yeah.
That's really strong.
Every Little Step I Take is on there.
That song, and Napoleon Murphy Brock sings with him on that, and maybe that's the tour that I saw at Berkeley Community Theater, because Napoleon was in the band. But
that's another way. Sheila E. was in it too, right?
Yeah, it's just fantastic. You know, he had such a sense of humor. He wasn't so taking everything so seriously, like which is okay to do as well, you know. But he just had a sense of fun about him.
Well, Jez, man, this is a perfect place to stop, man. We could talk hours and hours. Maybe we'll do it again.
I'm coming over. We're continuing this.
Yeah, let's do it, and then we could just kind of play some stuff. I need to take a look at that Zappa.
I'm bringing all that, and I want to see what you got, and I want to hear you play the Prophet and the B3, and I want to play the Rhodes with you.
Beautiful. Come on, please. And you got to play the B3 too, man. You can't.
Right. Maybe you can show me some things.
And I have a nice K Kawai piano. I would love to hear you, man. Because let me just brag about you for a second. The last time you came through, man, you and your lovely wife was walking out the door, and I said, please don't leave before sitting in. You're like, I think we got to leave. And I said, I looked at your wife, and I was like, please let him play one song. She was like, okay. And, man, I just loved hearing you play. But I feel like I hear some new stuff in your playing, Jez, which is crazy. Like, you have always been a creative cat. but I hear some other nuances in your playing now. I was like, I wonder what you're digging into. How are you getting these new sounds? You know, you were incredibly soulful, but it was like it was a newness to what you were playing. That's wild. That's
I
wild.
appreciated you asking me to play that day, you know, because sometimes we like to just come and enjoy ourselves. And, I don't have to play, come and listen. I want to hear you play because I get so much.
That's why I want to hear you play, man. I don't get a chance to check you out.
But part of that, we were talking a little bit earlier, I've been kind of going back and studying the work of like Red Garland and Whitney Kelly. I've been going a little more traditional. That's why my new album that's coming out April 30th in a Pine Groove, going to be on Bandcamp, jezgraham.com. You can get all the info. And I have this connection with Emrah Kotan, the drummer. We have this really special connection, like you and Chris have, and like me and Chris have too,
Right.
And it's special, when you get a musician you can play with that you can really inspire each other. But we captured this, and I'm only playing piano, no key bass. I do all the bass on the piano. The other thing is, we talked a little bit about long sets. Like at the airport, a long set for me is twofold. Number one, it's a safe space at the piano while Times Square is going by. Secondly, the people, like I look at that gig, it's like music therapy because people are stressed out. It's like I take their stress on and I give it back in music, but I am on a journey of trying to learn new things about how I might play and how what I might bring. So by doing a longer set, I never know what I'm going to play. So people and get the feeling of what I might play. So I've really been getting into this thing. All right. It's my new logo by Stephen Grillo.
That is nice.
Thanks. I've been getting into a little more that traditional feel. Like if it feels good, like those cats, like Red Garland and Wynton Kelly, I just am
I never put it together until you just said it just now. That was the influence that I heard. Red Garland for sure.
Oh man. And it's just the way it feels. And I'm trying to not think as much about chops, and I'm trying to lay back a little more, although I'm not successful, I'm going to overplay. I'm going to do that, but I'm conscious of it. I'm thinking about it, That's
you made me shush somebody that night, man, because you were playing and they were trying to talk to me and I was like, shh.
Yeah. That's why I'm trying to get into just some of the more traditional roots of the music and make it feel good. That's really what I've been thinking about a lot.
I forget about your hat game. Is so good.
Well, I got that from Jana, but when she moved to New York, I took over the hat.
Yeah, that's right. She was wearing hats too. I forgot.
She started it. Yeah.
Did I see something that you had a feature with David Ellington?
Dave Ellington played B3 on an album we did live at Eddie's Attic. It's if you scroll back up there. Oh, there it is. No, there it is. Maybe not. That's the one I did with the Colonel. That's David Marks live in LA. But yeah, if you scroll up, there's the one we did at Eddie's Attic. David Marks, one of the original Beach Boys, and we did a live album. Del Baroni was on bass.
Oh wow!
Dave Ellington on organ.
There it is.
And Dave Logeman, who actually was a drummer on one of my all-time favorite Zappa albums called "You Are What You Is" from 1980, and he played with Jan and Dean. And anyhow, Joel Morris did one of our gigs too. But the live album we did, it's on Bandcamp. It's Beach Boys songs, but improvising on them. So it's really, it's like almost a jam version of Beach Boys stuff, more blues based. And David's a great improviser. He's on the first 5 Beach Boys albums. And Dave Ellington.
You want to know a fun fact?
Huh?
You want to know a fun fact?
Yeah.
Me and David Ellington went to college together.
Really? In Louisiana?
New Orleans. Yeah, UNO. That's where I met Dave Ellington first.
Incredible. Well, man, that's cool. I love Dave Ellington, and he killed it on the organ on the B3 or whatever he used at that gig. I can't remember what it was, but David Marks of the Beach Boys, every time I talk to him, he asks me about Ellington. That's like his favorite B3 player.
Oh, wow. When we were in New Orleans, I never heard him play B3. And then when I moved out here, like summer of 97, And then Dave Ellington moved out here after Katrina, which was 2005-ish, like
Yeah.
that. And so we reconnected. Here's a funny Dave Ellington story. So he was playing with another friend of ours named Clarence Johnson, had this gig, and Ellington had 2 keyboards set. He has a lot of keyboards and stuff. But anyway,
Oh yeah. You know,
so he was playing, and he said, "Hey, Tyrone, I haven't seen you since the UNO days." I was like, "Me neither." He's like, "You gonna sit in?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Don't play that top keyboard." So, Jez, I had no intention of playing the top keyboard until he told me don't play it, right?
what was
And I
it?
just started laughing, and I said, he says, "No, seriously, don't play it." He's like, "It's kind of like my thing now. I designed some sounds and stuff."
Okay.
So I was playing, sitting in, and Dave Ellington's head was turned, and I just kind of touched the top keyboard. Bump. He turned around real fast, like, "Hey!"
You had to.
Right. But then when I started playing organ, he's like, "Are you going to start playing organ?" I said, "Yeah, I kind of love it." He's like, "Oh man." I was like, "No, Dave, there's got to be enough room for all of us, you know." But he's been great because if I have any questions, I call him up, Matt Kaminsky, everybody.
And Mose, I saw Mose at the airport. He told me he got with you once about the
Yes, Mose. I went to Mose's house, man.
Yeah.
And people don't know how incredible a B3 player he
He's
is.
always told me that's his instrument. That's what he loves.
He's incredible, but we don't get a chance to hear him on it.
You got to go to his house to hear.
You got to go to his house. He's got a rig. He hasn't unveiled it yet. He's got like a Hammond X something with a rig with foot pedals and everything. But he says he's got to dial it in. But he sounds killing.
Mose is the best. Yeah. Mose is one of my main mentors. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's crazy.
He's been around. Yeah, well, man, Jez, thank you so much for this time, man. We'll definitely do it again. And
hey, thanks for inviting me. And you know, I keep up with you and Chris, and I just love the work you're doing, and appreciate your friendship, both of you. And you guys are so talented, and I'm a big fan of you both and of your show.
You know, I would love.